this is a question about change. I think what I'd like to talk about is leadership in general, and then I could, in the context of leadership, talk about the term chief and then the term in our language for leader, which is Ogima, if I'm pronouncing that right. My Ottawa is somewhat anglicized. You can get the correct pronunciation from Kenny Pheasant or from my uncle. They're both very good at speaking their language. When I think about our indigenous form of leadership, most of my information comes from talking with people. And I would not say I'm an expert in this area or an expert on our culture, so whatever I say is really my point of view, which you, in speaking with other people, may be validated, or I think you need to get a variety of points of view on this question of leadership. It's my understanding that historically we have always been organized in rather small communities, clan groups and family groups, and our leadership was somewhat informal, and people were called upon to lead in particular areas as the need would arise. So that no one was the king, no one was the chief, and that leadership kind of came and went as I said, as the need was there. During the time that we were beginning to interact with the non-Indians and signing treaties, I think there probably were certain individuals who emerged as people who were particularly good at interacting or negotiating with the non-Indians. They may have been people who, in some way or another, had acquired some skills in the English language. It seems to me that it would have made good sense to put those people forward, at least some of them, in the capacity as treaty negotiators, along with maybe other clan leaders. Although I don't know that for a fact, it just seems like it would have made good sense. And so that some of the people who are often people think that those people who signed treaties were the chiefs. And I think that's somewhat of a erroneous concept or assumption. They probably were people who were looked upon as leaders, but as I said, that concept was not a stagnant sort of concept where you were a leader once and forever. And that's not to say that those people who did sign the treaties, I think that is an honorable thing, and that a significant event in our history. But I don't know that I would regard those people as chiefs necessarily, although they were put forward by the people as those that would participate in the negotiation of the treaties. To me, the idea of leadership in our community in the past and in the present has to do, again, with relationships. A general principle that I've come to think about. I can't say I've incorporated this into my life. I wish I had incorporated this into my life to a greater extent than I have. But a principle that it seems to me is a good one to live by is that the future of our people here, the Ottawa people, must emerge from our hearts. Because in the absence of looking at it that way, it's not going to make sense. And I really believe that's always been a principle that our people have lived by, and that the real leaders in the community have lived by. That the future of our people, even if we were talking about back in the 1850s, the future of our people has to emerge from our heart. And so that, in my way of thinking, the people who are really the leaders in the community were the mothers and the grandmas and the grandpas and the Nokomis and the Mishomis, the people who lived by that principle that that life has to emerge from your heart. And I think that's the principle that we should use in our tribal government today. It's a much harder one to live by today, I think. Or maybe it's always been hard. It just seems awfully difficult to me today to really apply that principle in the fast-moving, rapidly changing, complex environment that we find ourselves in today. But I think it's still one that is the foundation of leadership. People listen to those people who operate from their heart in the long run. In the short run, they may not. In the long run, they do.
That's wonderful. Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. The last question, unless you...
There's probably a word in our language for that, but I don't know. I don't know it.
Yes, Lorraine, I think that's about right. I want to fiddle with the light a little bit before you ask the last question.
The last question, so you can think about it for a minute, is we're hoping that, if you recall the model that we showed your uncle in December, the first introductory area for the whole exhibition is a circular theater. And the format that we're thinking is that it would be a video projection, but what the visitor will see is faces of children, and they'll hear children's voices asking, what does it mean to the Indian, what does it mean to the Anishinaabe? And there'll be many voices from many different people, young, old, answering the question. So the question that we're asking everybody that we interview is, if a child were here, if Rose, say, when she's 8 years old, would ask you, Mom, what does it mean to be Indian? What does it mean to you, Mom, to be Indian? How would you answer that?
And once again, you're an imaginary person, sort of over in here.
Picture Rose at the age of 8 over there.
Are you all set?
Yes.
Okay. The question of what does it mean to be Anishinaabe is not an easy question to answer, at least not for me, because I have to look pretty deep inside myself for the answer. But if my daughter were to ask me this, I would have to tell her I don't have a simple answer for that, but it's something that she has to find. And the place where you look for that is inside your heart. It's not a question of your head, although you can answer it there, and there are answers. They're good intellectual answers for that. But for me, the answer to that question is in your heart. Let me explain what I mean by that. To me, that answer to that has a lot to do with relationships and how our culture is passed through our relationships with other people. When you take culture out of the context of relationships, it does become a question or an answer that's more in the head than in your heart. If you keep culture in the context of relationships, then the answer to the question, what does it mean to be Anishinaabe, is in your heart. And I think that's where that belongs. That's where the strength of our people is. It comes out of our hearts. Now, there are all kinds of aspects to what it means to be Anishinaabe. But all of these aspects, again, must be dealt with from the center in your heart. Things like our language. I think our language is an important part of being Anishinaabe, and the preservation of our language. Because when you can speak the language, you can understand and see the world from the point of view of our ancestors. And when you can't speak the language, you can only get glimpses of that, but you can never think exactly the way that our, in the concepts and in the descriptions that our ancestors were able to think about their world. So language and the preservation of our language is an important part of being Anishinaabe. And I really respect those people who are able to speak our language and to speak it well. Another part of being Anishinaabe, I think, is our land and our relationship to the land and to the plants and animals. That's an aspect that in this modern world we often forget, but it is an important part of who we are, because the plants and the animals throughout our history have been our teachers, that we really have been the students, and the natural environment, the sky, the sun, the stars, the moon, the rocks, the earth, the water, the plants, the trees, have always been the teachers of the Anishinaabe. So if we really want to learn again, as I said, about ourselves, we have to look to the other living things around us and learn from them and have a relationship with them. Again, that relationship has to emerge from your heart, which means it has to be a respectful relationship, one in which you are the listener. It's hard for a lot of people to understand that relationship between our ancestors and the rest of the natural world, because so many of us have not been able to experience that. If my daughter were to ask me about what it means to be Anishinaabe, one of the ways I would help her understand that is to help her have experiences that would allow her to interact with the natural environment. And we do that. We do things together that allow her to do that. That I try to do things that will be natural experiences for her, to help her learn about that relationship. I think thinking about the future, one of the commitments I have that to me is part of being Anishinaabe is I am committed to protecting our rights, our treaty rights, our land. I think we have an obligation both to our ancestors and to our children in that regard. That those of us in the middle, between the ancestors and the children, have some obligation to protect our land, our resources, and our rights, so that we can continue to survive in this country into the future. No one else is going to do that for us. In fact, other people are going to make that difficult. And that is a reality. It's not as nice a reality or as pleasant as thinking about our relationship to the plants and animals, because unfortunately our relationship with the outside world on both sides has not always emerged from the heart. There's been a lot of pain and suffering, and I think that for me, part of being Anishinaabe is to understand that, understand our history, all the things that I love to think about, and some of the things that cause me a great deal of pain. And I have to I can't pretend that the pain isn't there, because it is, and I think it's unhealthy to pretend that it's not. So I think all of us have an obligation to take a hard, long look at our history and to understand that, to experience all the feelings that that brings out, and to heal from that, and then to move on and grow and continue to live. But I don't think I would ever want to, I would never want my daughter to pretend that many of the painful things in our history are not there. I want her to understand that they are there, and then to learn how to take those things and turn them around and make them into constructive motivation for protecting our rights.